DNR Executive Division, and I'm here with several folks from the DNR, and we're going to talk today about our public land strategy. And this is one of our public meetings, and we're happy to have you here, spending some of your day with us. We want to talk to you more about the strategy, why we're doing it, and how you can engage with it and provide us input. So I'd also like to introduce some of the folks of our team. We have Beth Foltz, Deb Jensen, you've met Jessica. We also have Megan Stevens and Carrie Weber with us. And all of these folks have worked on this project. And when we get into the question and answer session, you may be hearing from any number of us as we respond to your questions. So I just want to give you an overview of the state land and the public land we're going to be talking about today. Obviously, there's public land that occurs at different levels of government. There's federal lands such as national forests or national lake shores, national parks, or wildlife refuges. And then there's state lands that the DNR manages. And we're going to be talking about the DNR managed state lands during this land strategy and during this presentation. And so when we look at the DNR ownership, we manage on behalf of the citizens of the state 4.6 million acres of public lands and 6.4 million acres of mineral rights. And so it's a real privilege to manage these lands on your behalf. And if you look at the map on the right, you'll see that the state forest lands are just under 4 million acres. They're mostly in the Upper Peninsula and the northern lower part of the state. State parks and state game areas each have over 360,000 acres. State game areas are primarily in the southern part of the Lower Peninsula, and then state parks are generally spread throughout the state. I want to talk to you a little bit about how state land was acquired, and a lot of this happened at the turn of the turn of the 20th century, when a lot of the timberland that made up Michigan was logged over, and that land was tried to put back on the tax rolls by the local units of government because they wanted to get that land back into productivity, and it was seen that farming was a good alternative after the forests were gone. But the soils were poor and the growing season short. A lot of times those farms, especially around the Great Depression, reverted through lack of payment of taxes to the state of Michigan, and then sometimes they were reconveyed and tax reverted again. And it was at that time that it was decided by some leaders within the state that a better use of that land would be to put it back into forest land. And so over half of our state land came to the state of Michigan through tax reversion. Another over 25% was purchased with a variety of funds, including federal funds, state funds, sometimes other outside funds. And in the way the land was purchased determines in many cases maybe some restrictions on that use or what can be done there. There's been almost 20% of our land has come through exchanges, and exchanges with the Department of Natural Resources is a routine way that we do business. So we're trading lands with applicants to improve our state land footprint, as well as to resolve maybe conflicts or issues between ownership. Other lands have been gifted to the state either by individuals or companies, and some have come through legislative or other means. So the land strategy we're going to talk about today was required by Public Act 240 in 2012. And really, there's been a lot of discussions over the years about, what are state lands used for? How much is the appropriate amount to have? Are they being used to the highest and best use for the citizens of the state? And so these discussions have occurred periodically throughout the years. And it was in 2012 that these discussions were happening again. And the legislature mandated to the Department of Natural Resources that we should create a public land strategy that answers many of these questions about land ownership and how it's administered and what those lands are for. So the land strategy was created by the department with a lot of stakeholder engagement and public review. It was written in 2013, but it was not approved by the legislature or adopted by the governor until 2018. So basically, it sat on the shelf for about 5 years. And what this strategy does, once it was approved, was it provides a framework for our DNR managed public lands and directs us towards how to manage those lands, what those lands are for, and what benefits they provide to the state. The legislation also said that the current strategy is set to expire in 2021. And so that same statute that required us to create the land strategy in 2013 requires the department to submit an updated public land strategy to the legislature for their review and approval by July 1st, 2021. So before we talk about the land strategy that's coming out in 2021, I want to talk about the implementation of the 2013 strategy. As I mentioned, it was passed in 2018, and there's some pieces of that we're in the process of implementing right now. The primary one that we're really looking at is the project boundary review and the state land review. So I'll talk about those for a minute. Many of our DNR lands, whether they're state forests, state game areas, or state parks, have what we call a project boundary around them. And that boundary is largely for internal use, but what it does is it guides our acquisition, and it lets us prioritize those lands that we would, if we had the funds, if we had a willing seller, we would seek to obtain to add to our land holdings. So the land strategy in 2013 called for a reduction of private land within those boundaries by 1 million acres. So right now there's about 2 million acres of private land within state project boundaries, and the plan called for us to reduce that number by 1 million acres. So we had our DNR staff take a look at those boundaries. We went through an internal review process, and they were able to cut about 1 million acres out of those boundaries. And what that's going to do is the approximately 1 million acres that's left, it lets us focus a little bit more intently on those. Land use patterns change over time as lands get developed and things like that. So it does allow us to be more strategic about lands we seek to acquire. There's going to be an external review of that. We expect that to happen in November, and we expect our DNR director to review.
Scott, I'm going to have you hit pause for a second.
Okay, absolutely.
We need to troubleshoot some technology. So it looks like I'm getting some chats. It looks like people are using the link from last night. Oh, Debbie, you're on it. Okay. So we're going to have some more people joining us. It looks like they clicked on last night's link, and Debbie just sent them the link for today's meeting. So I think we should be on the path, the correct path in just a minute. So, all right. Thanks, Debbie.
I'll just hold up. I was on autopilot there for a while. So yeah, if we have questions coming back, we can cover those.
Hey, Scott, while we're waiting, this is Will Swikel, Beaver Island.
Yeah.
Could I ask you a question regarding about how you guys quote unquote, cut 100 million or 100 acres out of or 100 million, no, I'm sorry, 1 million acres out of the project boundary? Was that just simply by redrawing the lines, or were you guys, okay? Yeah, and so a lot of times, some of the things that really guided that decision, I think that's a really good question. A lot of the public, or a lot of the privately held lands that are close to DNR state land holdings, those are really, for a lot of folks, really highly desirable real estate parcels. And so what we see a lot of times is we see subdivision. So you may have an 8-acre block that gets split up into little 5-acre parcels or even smaller subdivision lots. And at the point you start getting, residential housing and things like that on those properties, it really
decreases the conservation value for the department. And so we can just look, a lot of this was driven by those land use changes that we could see through the fractionalization of those parcels. So that drove a lot of that. Is basically whether it's occupied by residential housing.
Okay, yeah, because as a layperson, as a hunter and fisher that loves loves Michigan's and America's public lands, it seems losing a million acres from the project boundaries just about had a heart attack over here when I saw that. So
yeah,
thanks for the clarification that it's really looking at current land use and reevaluating whether or not that property is still value from a conservation standpoint.
Yeah, and I want to be clear that wasn't, that was private land that the states never owned. And so, when the legislature asked us to take a very strategic look at what we might want to acquire in the future, obviously there's some lands there that we want to add to our holdings because they help consolidate our ownership, which makes management easier. A lot of times they'll give us access out to a public road. It makes the boundary even more identifiable to the public. I'm picking up some feedback, Jess. Is everyone muted?
I will double check that. I was just looking and Debbie's helping troubleshoot too. There's about 5 people still on yesterday's link. So I was going to, and Debbie, if you can send a note to ask if anyone's still in that meeting to verbally let the group know that there is a link in the chat box. So the few remaining people can join. That should resolve that. And then I will double check to make sure everyone's muted. And I see our numbers are going up. We now have 14, so we may have a few more. So yeah, I don't know if it's worthwhile, Scott, for to do a summary recap or make sure everyone gets a copy of the slide presentation afterwards. But we did a great job with technology yesterday. A little bit of a snafu today. So thanks everyone for your patience.
So just to sort of wrap that up, Will, we were asked to take a really strategic look at what we may own in the future, and so that's what really drove our decision to sort of re-look at those boundaries. For folks that are just joining us, we're really just getting started. I'm going through a PowerPoint presentation talking about the land strategy. This strategy is going to focus on the 4.6 million acres of DNR managed public lands in the state. It's not really addressing the federal lands or local, publicly owned lands. It's really focusing on DNR holdings. We're in the process of rewriting the 2013 strategy as required by legislation. So as part of that implementation, we've reviewed our project boundaries. Our director, we expect to adopt those new boundaries in December. There will be a public component to that where you'll get a chance to take a look at what those recommendations are, and in November. So stay tuned for that. The other part of that is, and I'll just continue on at this point, and we'll get on with the presentation. The other part of that is the land strategy of 2013 called for a review of 240,000 acres of state lands that are in state land ownership. And the criteria for what 240,000 acres are to look at are those lands that fall outside of those project boundaries, that were not only outside the project boundaries, but less than 200 acres in size, or they could be greater than 200 acres in size if they had an irregular shape. And the thought was that a lot of times the DNR owns large blocks of land, but as you get into those smaller parcels, they take a lot of staff time to administer and to manage. and they may actually not contribute very strongly to the department's mission. So we've been through this type of review before, but the strategy in 2013 directed us to do that again. And when we look at those parcels, our staff would be recommending that they fall into one of 4 different categories. It would be either retain, because it was meeting the department's mission, or perhaps due to where it was located, to offer it to local units of government or an alternate conservation owner, to offer it for a land exchange. I mentioned that land exchanges are something that we often do within the department. And then the 4th option would be to dispose of it at a sealed bid auction, and we do that as well. I want to point out that there's some lands that don't have project boundaries around them, and those, for the sake of this review, were pretty much taken off the table. And examples of those lands might be DNR facilities such as fish hatcheries, trails, or boat access sites. So those are serving a public purpose, so we're not in the process of reviewing those. But the other 240,000, we've identified those lands, and we're sending them out to our field staff in groups of 10 at a time to begin that internal review process. We started that in about a week ago. And then as those decisions on those parcels are made, or recommendations made, they'll go out for public review. We expect that first group of counties to come out for public review in early 2021. And then eventually there's a pretty stringent vetting process. Eventually if those lands were categorized in those different areas, our director would take action on those, and we would move on to the next set of 10 counties. As you can imagine, when you're looking at this number of parcels, this many acres in this many counties, it's going to take a couple of years to finish out this part of the plan. So moving ahead to the 2021 strategy, the DNR director assigned a land strategy sprint team within the department to work on that, with representation from all the different aspects of DNR management that we have. And really we're charged with meeting the requirements of the Public Act of 2018 and create that updated strategic plan by July 1st of 2021. And so the legislation said that if anything is going to change from one strategy to another, that we had to provide a justification for making a change. And so we looked at parts of that we looked at all parts of the 2013 strategy. We said, are they effective? Are they doing what they're supposed to do? And we evaluated, we had a facilitated session, we evaluated those specific goals and strategies to determine which ones really sort of met the mark, or were doing what they intended to do, which ones maybe weren't measurable or didn't meet the need of advancing our public lands for the benefit of the citizens. And so we evaluated those, and we have recommendations to some of those to remove, and we're explaining why we're doing that. And then there's things we just think that weren't covered in that plan that can be adopted this time. And so that evaluation of the 2013 strategy is really what's forming the foundation for the strategy that we're in the process of building right now. So what we've done initially, and what we'd like your input on, is we've developed some draft components of that new land strategy based on the outcome of that assessment. We're putting those out on the DNR website. We've gotten responses from inside the DNR on those, and now we're in the process of engaging externally with both the public and stakeholders, and you're part of that process. So our updated land strategy focus is really, our goal is to highlight the value of a robust and strong public land base. We recognize this land is really important to our quality of life here in Michigan, both from an economic standpoint as well as a natural resources protection standpoint. And so we want to highlight those values. The plan is going to provide regional and statewide measurable goals, strategies, and objectives. We're going to provide an insight on our DNR land ownership and the values that it provides. We're also going to identify those key actions that we're going to undertake in the next 6 years to help advance our land strategy. And the updated goals are really going to center around, primarily protecting our natural and cultural resources, providing access to outdoor public recreation opportunities, and then promoting responsible natural resource management. So the timeline of this process is right now, September and October of 2020, we've put an outline of the land strategy in place on our DNR website, michigan.gov/public lands. We're holding public meetings like the one you're in today. We also had facilitated regional meetings with stakeholders. And then we have a number of presentations identified for different councils the DNR works with in board meetings. In November and December, we're going to incorporate the feedback we hear today and at these other meetings, and we're going to incorporate that in a sort of a final first draft, if you will, that it's going to come out in January of 2021 for further review. So, like I said, we're going to post that to our website, the Public Lands website, so you can see the sort of the final product that we're gonna have input on. You'll see notices for those sessions coming up, where we'll incorporate review or input that we hear in those meetings. And our goal is to have a final product out. Sent to the legislative committees as required by statute by May 1st. And again, the final product we're hoping will go to the, hopefully be adopted soon after July 1st when it goes to the legislature. So our engagement efforts, like I said, we're meeting with the public and stakeholders. We've done email notifications and press releases, social media. We've got the dedicated website that I talked about. We also have a dedicated email to receive comments. So if you go to DNR land strategy at michigan.gov, you can drop us a note anytime and let us know what you think of the land strategy or things that may be in it or things that you'd like to see included in it. And we'll accept feedback for this draft through the end of October, but you can drop us a line anytime. And if your comment doesn't make it by October 31st, we'll pick it up in a future version of the plan. Again, we talked about the facilitated stakeholder sessions and the virtual public meetings and the presentation. So we're doing all we can to bring attention to this effort. As part of this, just for fun and for public engagement, we had a survey on our DNR website where we created an interactive map, and we asked the public to drop instead of dropping a pin, drop a tree where the public land was that you value the most. And when folks did that, they could leave their zip code where they were from, and they did that with these blue dots. And then they put a piece of a tree on the land they valued the most. And this wasn't a real scientific study, but it was just to engage folks and get them talking and thinking about public lands that we all use. And then they also shared with us the thoughts on a brief 3-question survey as to why public lands matter to them. And just I wanted to share with you some of the results of that. If you look at the respondents to that survey, they said overwhelmingly over 50% said they really valued public land for the access to the recreational opportunities. So 56% of the respondents said that. Almost 30% said protection of land, wildlife, and cultural resources was most important to them. And another 14% that said that management of wildlife and timber were important to them. And then how important were they? You can see by the results that they were either very important or extremely important to almost all of the respondents. So again, you would expect that from the folks that we ask, and just like you, public lands are important. And so that's what they're letting us know. When we talked about if there's any limitations to enjoying the public land, most of them said there's no limitations at all. They're able to enjoy the land. There's some other thoughts were that sometimes it's too noisy. Maybe the access isn't close to home. They didn't feel safe. There may be conflicting recreational uses, surrounding development, other reasons, lack of accessibility, lack of transportation. and others. So we hope to do more surveys in the future to, again, learn about, what folks are enjoying about public lands and maybe any limitations they're experiencing. So at this time, that wraps up sort of the formal presentation, and we can kind of just switch over to a question and answer session. So I'll just turn this over to Jessica to facilitate that. And thanks for everybody's attention and time. And we just urge you to stay engaged with this process. Go to our public lands website, drop us a note, let us know, are there things that we're doing right? Are there things we're missing? Give us your thoughts and ideas. We really value that. Thank you.
So hi, everyone. I'm Jessica Mistek from Fisheries Division, and I know it looks like several of you, there was some sort of mix-up with the links. We had a separate Teams link for yesterday versus today, and some of you, I'm not sure how the mix-up occurred, assuming it's our fault somehow, so I apologize for that you were sent to yesterday's link and not today's. So you may have missed part of this presentation. Scott, do you know, is this presentation on our public lands website if people want to view it afterwards if they missed part of it?
I'm not sure if it's there this minute, but we can certainly put it there.
Jessica,
is that what you were going to say, Carrie?
Well, I was actually going to say we are intending to post the recordings from the meeting last evening and today on the DNR website. So for any of you that may have missed the first part of the presentation, it will be posted within the next day or so, and you can go back and take a look at that. So apologies for the mix-up, but it will be posted so that you can read or you can listen through the whole presentation.
Perfect. Thanks, Carrie. So if people have questions, and if you missed the first part, there's two ways you can raise your hand, unmute yourself and ask a question, or if you prefer, you can put it in the chat box and I can ask it. The first question that came through from Will is, how many people participated in the Drop a Tree survey?
We had, I can take the answer. This is Carrie Weber with Forest Resources Division. We had 718 people that took the online survey where they could drop the tree.
Are there any other questions from the group?
Hello, this is Evan McNally in Upper Michigan. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead, Evan.
Yeah, when I looked over the draft content on the DNR's website, first off, the scope is pretty tremendous. There's quite a few current pressing issues that are dealt with in that update, and I think the DNR staff might agree with this, but to the outside, the general public, many of us feel like the DNR is underfunded for the responsibility that it has. And some of these current challenges like invasive species, for example, or changing recreational uses or recreational use conflicts that are likely to occur on DNR lands, there's a more need for conservation officers, there's more need for natural resource managers to monitor and to intervene or to steward resources to take care of them. The science that's needed to understand these problems, like invasive species or climate change. So in that that list at the beginning of the presentation, one part of the process is to provide an updated report to the Michigan legislative committees that are involved. I assume the natural resources committees and so forth. In that process, does the DNR make the case for what their actual funding needs are? And how deep does the education go with those legislators to understand the scope of the problem and the scope of the state's responsibility to deal with these issues and how the funding needs to parallel those needs? That's my question.
Thanks. And Scott, I believe you need to take off if you are still on and want to take that. Otherwise, I don't know, Carrie, if you want to talk about how we approach educating the legislators.
Sure, I'll start. I know Scott indicated he had some background noise, so I'll start and then Scott can cover whatever I missed. So, hi Evan, it's good to hear your voice. We are, well, a couple of things. So a lot of what we have proposed as including as measurable objectives and the strategies for each of those goals that are on the website that you took a look at. A lot of that is work that the department is already doing. So we tried to leverage a lot of the work the department has underway already. Of course, there's always opportunities for us to do more, if we had more funding and more staff, and that's certainly part of, I think, the opportunity here is not necessarily to go to the legislature with this document and ask for funding in order to implement it. We're required by the legislature to provide a land strategy anyway. But what it does is help us make the case as we go through our annual budgeting process that this is something that if the legislature approves of the update, then we can go back and say, look, this is something you approved. We're working on implementing it and make the case for why we need the budget that we do for certain programs. And part of it is, as you mentioned, also an opportunity for education. The land information section that is out on the website right now for review is an attempt to do exactly that, educate not only the public, but the legislature as well on some of the work the department already does and is doing as it relates to public land ownership in Michigan. So it is a good opportunity for us to help inform and educate the legislators as well as the public and our stakeholders. Scott, did you want to add anything to that?
Only, I think it's a great answer. Only that the department works with primarily restricted funds, meaning the funds come from a specific source and they're to be used in a very specific means. For example, revenues from hunting and fishing licenses, fund a lot of our activity, and then those funds have to be dedicated to, those fish and wildlife management obligations. Same thing with camping fees, fund parks, passport fees, fund parks, timber sale receipts, fund forest management. So there's a lot of really narrowly defined general fund or specific funds that the department uses. We get very funds, and when we do get the general funds, they're very closely identified with a specific project. You may have noticed the budget came out just yesterday, and the general funds we did receive were for very specific line items like funding new firefighting equipment and things like that. So so a lot of times, Carrie's right, we're trying to leverage the work we're already doing because we know those funds are short. But yeah, part of this is we can highlight all of the needs within the department, and that there is with your managing this much ownership, there's a lot of needs. But that's part of it.
So we have a question from Jim Schaefer. Do you have an idea of whether the DNR will be emphasizing donations to local conservancies or sale of properties? In other words, is the priority to keep properties in public ownership?
So I'm guessing that question relates to the state land review that's underway. And as Scott mentioned, there's kind of 4 different categories for how those lands will be classified. And any of those that are retained, obviously, are parcels that we would want to retain in public ownership and DNR management. It's helping to accomplish the DNR mission and meet a public need. And then there's the category to offer them to local units of government and alternate conservation organizations. And for those particular parcels, if neither of those types of entities are interested, the department will retain those parcels. So those would be the types of parcels that we would be seeking to still have some sort of public ownership and access to. So whether that's owned by a county, a township, a land conservation organization, those are parcels that we believe should still remain in some sort of public ownership with public access and or natural resource protection occurring, but it might just be more appropriate for another organization to own and manage those lands. It might be adjacent to an existing township park, for example, or a nature preserve that's managed by a conservation organization. So those are examples that would fall into that category. The other 2 classifications, which would be those that we would hold for a land exchange or those that we would dispose through a land auction, there's not the intent that those would necessarily stay in public ownership. So those could be acquired by any individual that has an interest either in doing an exchange with a department. They may own land that's a priority for the DNR to acquire and bring into public ownership. They could offer that to us in exchange, or if we sell the land at auction, then that makes funding available that we can then utilize to acquire priority lands.
So there's a question from Will. Can you provide a link to the state land review information on the DNR website?
So yes, there will be a lot of information coming on that. Right now, we're in the very early stages and beginning internal reviews, but we will be having an entire public and stakeholder review component of all of those recommendations. Likely, it won't be until after the first of the year, but there will be a lot of information that will be out there, and we're talking about having an interactive map likely available that you can look at and see what the recommendations are, provide comments directly on those parcels, and likely we'll see kind of how the world looks then, but we'll hold some public meetings, whether they're virtual or in person. That remains yet to be seen, but we'll also be doing some public meetings specific to each group of counties as we work through that process. So the 10 counties that we're starting the review on now, we will have all of that information will be available. That is something that is coming.
So, and it looks like we may have had another person just join. I apologize. It looks like there was confusion with the meeting appointments and the meeting links. A recording of today's meeting will be posted on our website, so you can view it in its entirety. And again, my apologies. I'm not sure how the mix-up happened, but you will be able to see everything. So right now we're in the Q&A part, and Jason has a question. Does the department have a plan or process to seek input from groups or individuals outside the usual ones at the table? For example, urban, suburban, diverse, underserved communities, etc.
Scott, did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I gave Jason a thumbs up on that one because that is part of the plan. So we recognize that with a state land footprint as big as we have, we're in 82 of 83 counties. That experience and the availability, the accessibility of those lands are different depending on where you live. So your experience in an urban area in Southeast Michigan may be very different, or will be very different than what you experience if you're in the Upper Peninsula, for example. And so we are in the process of really seeking out groups. Like you mentioned, diversity, equity, and inclusion is going to be a part of this plan because we recognize those differences. And so we're reaching out to our partners that that work with underserved communities and things like that to really get our message out there, because you're absolutely right. If you ask the same people, you'll hear the same things. You really need to expand the population that you ask if you want to hear a different result. So yeah, we're working really with the sort of the avenues and the inroads that we have to gain that information, Jason, because we recognize it's important. Carrie, I don't know if you'd have anything else to add.
No, I don't think so. I think you covered it. Just that is something that we did not focus on at all in the 2013 strategy. And that's something that we recognized in assessing that this time around that needed to be an area of focus for us.
Another question from Jim Schaefer. With the sale properties, will there be prohibitions on using grant funding to pay for the land?
I guess I might need a little bit more clarification to that. So is there a prohibition on grant funding? Is that what you said, to pay for the land?
Mm-hmm. So Jim, I don't know if you want to unmute yourself and restate the question.
Hi, yeah, this is Jim Schaefer, Oakland County Planning. Just curious if there would be a limitation on folks if it made it through your process and the properties were offered for sale. There may be some interest on the part of some groups that might have access to grant funding of various types. Would the state typically limit their ability to use that funding, or would you essentially look at it as an arm's length sale? And
It would be an arm's length sale if you have a grant source that you're using or would use to acquire those lands. As far as we're concerned, I don't believe that would be a problem for us. The one thing that to keep in mind, and I just mentioned this because it's the most used, at least by the DNR and for a lot of local units of government. So the Michigan Natural Resources Trust Fund, for example, I believe that they have a policy that would not allow the acquisition of property that's already in public land using that fund source. So that's something maybe to check on, and it's possible that policy has changed, but I believe that was a policy they had in place just as an example. So of course, if the grant has restrictions, the grant funding had restrictions related to that, then that would be something, you would maybe need to look into. But from the department's perspective, I don't think that, whatever fund source you might utilize in order to acquire some property from the department, we wouldn't have a concern with.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So another question from Will. He's concerned about the issue of restricted funding sources driving goal setting. For example, he's concerned that the pressure to provide access and opportunities for motorized sports impacts the quality of non-motorized sports. How do we balance these priorities?
Great question. And I would argue that honestly, probably one of the most difficult things that the department works to do is to try and balance competing priorities for the use of public lands. So it's definitely a challenge that we deal with on a regular basis. But with regards to restricted funding source, when we acquire something using a restricted fund source, if there are specific requirements that go along with that funding, that's something that we have to abide by in order to use those funds. And so that's something that we have to follow through on. A lot of it is federal funding that has some restrictions related to that. And we need to make sure that we're complying. We get audited by those agencies. So we have to comply with the requirements that go along with that funding. But that being the case, I think there is very much an understanding and recognition in the department that while there are a lot of individuals and various user groups that are very interested in motorized access, there are also a lot of individuals and user groups that are very interested in quiet recreation and non-motorized access into different areas. And so it's something that we try and do is to balance that to the extent that we can and make sure that we're offering those opportunities in a variety of areas. Obviously, we can't offer both opportunities in the same location because by nature, they're conflicting. But it is something that that we do recognize and try to ensure that we do offer those things. There is one of the key actions. I don't know if you had noticed this or had a chance to look at the components that are on michigan.gov/public lands, but in the key action section, there is specifically a key action that we'll be addressing and working on over the next 6-year period, which is to develop a road access plan, and specifically on the state forest system, that will identify what is an appropriate density of roads that allow for those motorized uses, as well as keeping in mind that there are a lot of individuals that also want non-motorized areas. Scott, I know that that's something that you've worked on. Do you want to add anything there?
No, I think it was a great answer. The only thing I would add to Will is this is, sort of that striking that balance between presumably conflicting priorities is sort of comes with the job. And we do that with a lot of things, all the way from, some of the timber sales that we do to, balancing recreation and things like that, that comes with the territory. And I would say that, when we look at the different lands that we manage, specifically the state forests and things like that, it's very much a co-management sort of regime. And so, you have foresters at the table, but you also have wildlife biologists that are concerned about, providing quiet places for wildlife habitat, whether it's, elk calving grounds or area, large unbroken areas for bear habitat, or any of those other concerns. There's folks at the table representing those interests. Same thing with fisheries and then recreation folks. They're all at the table, and they're kind of looking at that balance of like Carrie said, those quiet opportunities versus the motorized opportunities, and providing that balance. So it's tricky, but we're trying to do the best we can with that. So it is it's something we're not unaware of.
Will responded back. Thanks for your response. He knows that this puts us in a tough spot to balance the competing interests. Were there any other questions from the group?
This is Evan again. Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So there's pretty good evidence of changing trends in recreational use, with hunting and fishing showing declines in license sales, for example, and increased uses of other recreational activities like mountain biking and ATV, trail riding, that sort of thing. You mentioned that the fees for hunting licenses are dedicated for specified uses, but my understanding is that many of those other uses don't have a permit or a fee-based system, like mountain biking. How does the DNR plan to kind of transition to getting the funds they need from users to replace the declining user revenues?
Scott, is that something you want to address?
Yeah, if I had an answer to that, I would probably, I'd be in a much better place. It's a big challenge. You've sort of summarized that challenge really well, that we do have a declining, hunter base for sure, and hunting and excise taxes on firearms and ammunition pay for a lot of those wildlife management activities across the state. Fortunately,
Scott.
gun sales. Yep.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to let you know that Debbie Jensen from Parks and Rec Division had raised her hand, so she may be able to assist in a response to that question.
I saw that. So it is a challenge. There's Recovering America's Wildlife Act. If that gets passed, that may result in some funding. But yeah, that's a real concern. It's a real challenge for the department moving forward. I'll let my colleague Deb Jensen answer from maybe a different perspective.
Hi, thanks, Scott, and thanks for the question. I just wanted to let you guys know that is something that an advisory group, the Non-Motorized Trail Advisory Group, is looking at, is an alternative funding source for all these things that kind of fall outside of the dedicated funds. We have the license fees that support ORV and snowmobile use. We have the recreation passport that collects fees for vehicles coming into state parks and recreation areas and state forest campgrounds. But there's a lot of things that fall outside of that, which is mainly the non-motorized trails. So an advisory group is working on that. It's early days yet, so we're not quite sure where that is going to fall, but it's definitely a gap that we're looking into.
Thank you, Debbie.
So there's a question from Jason. He's asking about the feedback we've received from local units of government regarding the public land review, sale, and purchases. He wants to know if local units of are supportive, or if this is something that we'll need to overcome.
Good question. So a couple of things. So as we develop this land strategy, we are actively engaging with the Michigan Association of Counties and the Michigan Township Association. And actually we'll be meeting with Michigan Association of Counties, some of their members next week. So we've been working to get information out. Our staff in our marketing and outreach division, and Beth Foltz, who is on the meeting with us today, worked very hard on putting together quite a bit of information, an article to be published in the magazine the Michigan Township Association distributes. So we're doing a lot of engagement and outreach in the early stages of the development of this land strategy with those organizations specifically. As it relates to land sales and moving forward, I could take that, I guess, two different ways. So first is if you're talking in reference to the state land review that we're in the process of working on right now and implementation of that 2013 strategy, we have yet to see, I guess, how that plays out. We are still very early in that process and working just through that first group of 10 counties. So we will learn a lot more on their thoughts on it as we engage with them moving forward, which, as I mentioned earlier, will likely be the early part of next year. Aside from that, however, we do regular land transactions in the department, whether it's acquisitions, exchanges, and sales. And we do notify local units of government, and specifically on anything that is 80 acres or more in size. Anytime we are acquiring, selling, or exchanging lands of that size within their jurisdiction, they are notified in writing prior to the DNR director making a decision on those transactions. And for the most part, we have not received much as in the way of feedback from the local units of government. And I know just from my perspective on a lot of the projects I work on from a land acquisition standpoint, especially those larger tracts of land or bigger projects, we engage very early and often with the county and township officials on those transactions to make sure they're aware of what the department's working on and to address any questions or concerns that they may have. We usually it boils down to taxes, or in our case, the payment in lieu of taxes. And with land purchases, we pay nearly full ad valorem taxes. So a lot of times that will address their concerns right up front. But we do engage pretty extensively on all of our land transactions regularly, aside from that state land review, which will be more of the concerted effort. The only other thing I would add is that as we do go through the process of disposing of lands through that process, we will be doing that in a very balanced way so that we're not putting up, an extensive amount of acreage in one area that would depress the local markets. So that's also something we're cognizant of, and we'll be sure that we're approaching that in a way that's not going to cause issues like that.
So Jason said thanks for that response, and he's wondering if there's a role for NGOs outside of the public comment process.
Are you talking as it relates to the land strategy or the state land review? I would say that in both, there's certainly a place for NGOs, but I don't know if he's specifying one over the other.
Jason, did you want to unmute and speak up?
Sure, I was trying to type, but my fingers weren't moving fast enough. No, more for the larger review process. Obviously, I know there's many touch points, for both state, regional, and kind of the national-based NGOs, and just trying to figure out how best we can plug in, individually, for that. Just if nothing else, to be able to inform our membership, or to kind of help bring our expertise to bear as well.
Yeah, a lot of ways. So as it relates to the land strategy, we're very, very focused on doing a lot of engagement, especially with our stakeholders and with NGOs. And, you all have kind of a very specific focus and things that are a priority for you. And we want to make sure that we know what those are and that you see those in this land strategy. And if you don't, and there's a gaping hole there, we need to know that. So, so that's why it's especially important right now for us to get as much feedback as we can from you and your members, and take a look, if you can, at the components that are available on the website, on the michigan.gov/publiclands, and look especially at the strategies, the measurable objectives under each of those goals, but also the other components too, the key actions in that land ownership section, and let us know what we're missing. If there's something that is a significant priority and we don't have it on there, then we need to know about that. And we've already gotten some good feedback from stakeholders and other members of the public, on some of those areas that we need to strengthen or make sure that we're addressing that we don't have addressed currently. So we very much appreciate and are wanting and seeking your input as we move through this process. So aside from the input that we are going to be accepting up through October 31st on those initial draft components, we'll be using that feedback, as Scott mentioned, to help inform the complete comprehensive strategy that we intend to have completed by the end of the year, we will have a second round of engagement that will be after the first of the year, likely the latter half of January and early February. And with the entire completed land strategy available for review, we will again be seeking your input and feedback and into that document and what we've put together, and let us know, what we're missing or what you like, and that we do, we have covered what you're looking for. So yes, there's absolutely a role for NGOs and all of our stakeholders and the public in this process, and we're wanting very much to have your feedback on things so that we can make sure that we have a better product in the end. Scott, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I would just add to that your support. If you look at the strategy that we put out there and you feel that that's something your organization can support, your membership can support, and you can get behind, we would urge you to pass that information along to your legislators. What we don't want is we don't want to create a really great plan and then have it sit on the shelf. So if the plan's something that you can get behind, let's go ahead and get it adopted. I think that would be important. The other one is just to will put another note out, is the overarching goal to increase, maintain, or decrease the acreage of state land in Michigan. Boy, that depends on where you sit. And I responded in the chat box, right size it. So there's cases where I know others on the call have a definite opinion, but we gain we gain efficiencies through consolidation. So where we have a checkerboard of ownership, a lot of times we're spending a lot of energy working around those private lands. So if you can consolidate the ownership into bigger blocks of public land, that helps us out. So that may be in some cases an increase in acreage. In other cases where you've got isolated parcels that maybe are, there's a trash dump on there or something, or other, uses of the land that are degrading the land, those would be ones where you'd want maybe less acreage, and you'd want to, again, put your money into consolidation and not manage those little pieces. So it's a balancing act, like so many things. So that's just my little, my off the cuff response, but it really depends on where you sit.
And I would add to that too. It's from my perspective, and I think that a lot of us feel this way, there's not a specific acreage number that is a target for us, where if we reach that acreage, then we've met our goal and we don't want to acquire anymore. We don't want to divest of any. But because you never know, there could be this amazing piece of private land that has been well managed and has incredible resources and opportunities for the public that nobody ever thought would become available. And then all of a sudden it is. And, what if you can't buy any more acreage because you're at a cap? And so that's part of what happened with the adoption of this land strategy, is that the cap that had previously been placed on public land ownership managed by the DNR has gone away. So we're no longer living under a land cap. But this land strategy helps to explain what our priorities are, why it's a priority for us to have a public land base. And, one thing I think a lot of us have learned, especially in the department with the pandemic, has been how critical those public lands are to the public and to ensuring that the quality of life that we have here in Michigan. So that's something that's certainly come to light recently. The other thing, just to step back to the previous question too, is Scott's mentioning, supporting the land strategy if it's meeting, what your organization believes it should. We're really hoping that this strategy will not take 5 years to get approved through the legislature as the last one did. We're eager to implement it and to work with partners to implement it. And, we're hoping that we can move it through that approval process quicker so that we can get to work and start to implement what has been identified in the strategy.
Thanks, Carrie. Scott had to jump off. Will has another question. Some good questions. Thanks, Will. Michigan state lands are such an important part of our shared legacy. With all of the surplus land that's sold, I'm concerned that we will lose ground. He's an advocate for more state land.
Sure. And I think, Scott addressed this a little bit as far as, right sizing it, and part of it's having the right land in the right place. So as Scott said, if you were able to join us on the early part of the presentation, a vast majority of the land that we own, that the state owns and that's managed by the DNR, we acquired through tax reversion. So it was not land that we sought out and wanted to bring in to a public land base. It's land that we ended up with because of non-payment of taxes, a lot of that during the Depression era. And we, at that time, they decided to make something of it and used it as the foundation for our state forest system, which is great. But there are a lot of parcels that really are not assisting us in accomplishing our mission that we still own. And it's those types of parcels that we're looking at divesting of and then reinvesting in parcels of land that do assist us in meeting the mission of the department, whether it's the land consolidation that Scott mentioned for ease of management, but also for ease of public use to make sure that you're not accidentally trespassing on other private ownership, but also that have the not high natural resource values, the high recreation opportunities that the public is needing and wanting. So it's not so much that we're going to divest of a lot of land and have less public land available. It's so that we can reinvest and actually have more quality public land available, not only for natural resource protection, but also for public use. Hopefully that answers your question.
Thanks, Carrie. Did we have any other questions from the group? Okay. So as we said earlier, we have the website. The recording will be placed on the website. There's also additional ways if you have additional comments or questions after this meeting. There's ways to share those with us. Carrie, any final remarks from you?
Just, I want to thank everybody for joining us today, for taking some time out of your day to talk with us about this and get informed. And we are very much appreciate your questions and your input, and look forward to hopefully hearing from you as well if you have any additional thoughts or feedback. As Jessica mentioned, michigan.gov/publiclands. There is a link on there as well to the email address that we have set up. And up through October 31st is when we'll be accepting comments on those draft components that are out there right now. But that doesn't mean we won't still be accepting comment after that. So if you have something that comes up after that and you want to reach out to us, please do. We will still be monitoring that email account all the way through this update process. The October 31st is just the cutoff date for us to use all of the feedback and input that we've received and incorporate that into the overall land strategy that we'll have drafted by the end of the year. And then again, we will be reaching out and engaging again after the first of the year. So please continue to stay engaged with us on this. It is public's land and we manage it on their behalf. So we really, really need all of your input to make sure that we have a good, robust, comprehensive document. So thank you.
Okay, thanks everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.